as it relates to Brendan Sullivan and Cade McNamara, here's what I don't understand, Mark. I don't understand anybody that wants to argue that there should not be a competition and that this is Cade's job. Like, we had people, we talked about last week, we had people on the channel making comments like, why do they need another quarterback? Now, I hope that's almost tongue in cheek. But yeah, I agree with you. Brendan Sullivan does not have the high end experience that Cade McNamara does. But honestly, when you factor in the significant dip in talent level that Sullivan was, playing with at Northwestern compared to what Cade played with at Michigan when healthy, okay, that moves the two candidates closer together, you would assume. And then you also talk about the fragility that seems to be in place with Cade McNamara. He's struggled to stay healthy. He hasn't played a full season in 3 years. Like, upside wise, I think Brendan Sullivan, I think it's hard for me to say he's got a better arm. I think he's got much better legs. And that's not just because of Cade McNamara's injury. That's just what I see when I go back and watch those two guys healthy playing against Big Ten defenses. Sullivan's not Lamar Jackson or Michael Vick, but the dude's got some good wheels. I compared him to CJ Beathard. And for comparison, you go back and listen to my thoughts when Cade McNamara initially committed to Iowa. Mark, I compared his wheels to Jake Rudock. And that's not an insult to Cade McNamara. But who was more mobile? Who was more effective on the ground, Jake Rudock or CJ Beathard? CJ was. Maybe not by a landslide. Jake was good at scrambling and could pick up first downs. But CJ was more of a natural runner. And I think that's what, again, not a ton of tape to look at, but enough. I mean, the kid threw 90 some passes, I think, during his career at Northwestern. He was on the field a lot.
I was 199.
He threw 199 passes. Okay, that was a lot more than I thought. So yeah, I guess my point is, assuming Cade stays healthy, it should still be an open competition. And I echo what you said. It should be a 3 quarterback competition. And hopefully, even though I know this isn't the Kirk Ferentz style, it's a 4 quarterback competition with James Rezar, because he's going to be here next month and he's got wheels and upside. I know we keep hearing how hard it is to learn the offense. Well, this is a different offense. And I would think, I have confidence in this, that it's safe to say Tim Lester is a better teacher. I mean, just naturally, because he played the position. He's got a lot more experience than Brian Ferentz ever did. So even if the offense is just as hard to learn as Brian Ferentz's offense, I would have to think Tim Lester can more quickly get a quarterback up to speed. And my guess is it's not. Like, if you asked, that's one question I look forward to asking Tim at Media Day. I'm not going to try to put his foot in his mouth, but I want to know what he would say as it relates to learning curve. How long do you expect it to take for a high school quarterback to come into your program, come into your offense, and learn the offense to an adequate degree? You never stop learning, but when do you become adequate? Brian Ferentz was quoted in the past as saying it would take a year to year and a half, maybe more. That's insane. And Don Patterson has said as much. So I would hope that Tim Lester would, be able to look at James Rezar and say, okay, maybe it's going to be tough to get him up to speed this fall, but he should absolutely be in competition next spring and heading into the fall. Whereas in the past, it's felt like it's going to take at least 2 to 3 years for a guy to earn an opportunity at starting.
Kirk Ferentz is a smart guy, and he knows 50,000 times more about football and coaching and teaching football, especially, than I do. I wonder if it's ever struck him, if it's ever crossed his mind when he has answered the media or initiated a conversation with the media talking about how difficult it is to learn the offense, the irony in that, in how ineffective the offense has been. Like, usually you would expect like one of the best offenses in the country to say it's difficult to learn this offense.
Yeah. It is one of the many ironic things about the situation at Iowa. Absolutely. By the way, the comment here from Isaac says, look at the stats. Sullivan gets sacked so much, has no pocket awareness. Well, first of all, I don't need to look at the stats to tell me if he has pocket awareness or not. Because you know what a big part of sack numbers is, Mark? It's how you're holding up front. I know that sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but what has Northwestern's line been like? I really don't know. What has their offensive line been like the last 2 years, Mark? I'm guessing it's
Well,
probably been bottom third of the Big Ten in general. Is it
so,
safe to say?
man, did I watch any Northwestern football up until their bowl game last year? They obviously performed much better last year. They were so much better than they were previously, but they had a couple really good players up front. They had a situation the previous years when they were really awful, those 1-11 seasons. They were almost a microcosm, even worse than Iowa. Can't think of the tackle's name, who was a first round pick in the NFL draft, but the rest of the line was shoddy and awful, almost like a
Right.
Tyler Linderbaum type situation.
Yeah,
For Northwestern.
Ralph says that Northwestern has had a very good O line in all caps for the last 5 years. I don't buy that
5 years? No.
for a second. I don't buy that.
And the other thing to consider in this, Corey, is that Cade McNamara's one full season at Michigan, his offensive line won the Joe Moore Award as the best offensive line in college football. And I just verified the stats. They by far had the number one rushing attack in the Big Ten. They were dominant up front.
Who's this?
Michigan.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole point of this conversation. We're comparing Brendan Sullivan to Cade McNamara expectations. I'm just saying, like, what did Cade McNamara show us last year that would give us any reason to think he's ultra pocket aware? Like, he got sacked way too much and made some questionable decisions. Now, granted, he was dinged up, but all of this has to be taken into account. I'm looking at, just so people are aware, I'm looking at 2023 rushing numbers in the Big Ten. Do you want to guess where Northwestern ranked as it relates to, this is just one facet of offensive line play, and of course, running back play is a factor, but where did they rank as it relates to running the football last year, where they finished what, 8-4, 8-5,
8-5,
8-5? Where do you think they ranked in the Big Ten?
14 teams in the Big Ten. They ranked 11th.
They ranked 13 out of 14. So don't give me this malarkey about the offensive line being very good over the last 5 years. They ranked second to last, well below Iowa, averaged 102 rush yards per game, 2.8 yards per rush. So, and they rush the ball a lot, right? It's not like they're just running this pass-heavy offense. They rush the ball 458 times.
And they didn't face two of the four best defenses in the league in Ohio State and Michigan.
Correct. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert about Northwestern, but they exceeded expectations last year. I'm not saying I'm not saying that's due to Sullivan, as you can see in the board there. Played in 8 games, did have a good completion percentage and a solid touchdown interception ratio, but I think it's fair to say that offense, one of the primary issues with most offenses, typically, we could say the same about Iowa, is they're not good up front. They're not good enough up front. We keep hearing that. It all starts up front. We all, for years, have heard that Iowa's some offensive line factory. That's largely not true. And, maybe Sullivan will come here and that will be a problem. But I tell you what, Mark, who else I can tell you somebody who had worse pocket awareness than Brendan Sullivan, and I can say that without even watching much Brendan Sullivan tape. That's Deacon Hill. All right, that's Spencer Petras. Each of Iowa's last 2 guys, starting quarterbacks, have had as bad a pocket awareness as I've ever seen. Mark. By the way, did you see Spencer Petras won the starting job at Utah State?
I did.
How about that?
I will be after I review all the important games, top 25 games, of course, I will probably make it a habit to slide on over to the Utah State box score just to see what he's done. I bring this up just to see how Brendan Sullivan performed against quality competition. And again, I brought up the first set of statistics because in 195 passes, that's a pretty good sample size over 2 seasons. And assuming that 75% of those throws were against Big Ten teams, Big Ten defenses, he completed almost 69% of his throws. That's pretty impressive.
Compare that to recent Iowa quarterbacks. Just compare it to any of these recent Iowa. Even Nate Stanley. I remember for years people complaining about Nate Stanley's abhorrent completion percentage. Now, I think did it go up in 2019 to maybe close to 60%? But I mean, just the numbers from Sullivan last year for, a Northwestern team that, again, exceeded expectations, but talent-wise, I don't think anybody can argue that he had a lot around him. I would not be shocked if he wins the job, Mark. I would not be shocked. Because here's the other part about this. If just kind of going off history with how Kirk operates, not even Tim Lester, but how Kirk operates with injuries. People say, well, you don't lose your job due to injury. Okay, maybe not directly, but you can lose your job if you miss out on valuable time in practice and in camp. So last year, Cade McNamara missed out on a lot of time. He didn't have anybody behind him. When he went down at Kids Day, there wasn't nobody pushing him. So when he got 75% or 65%, whatever he was by game one, that was still better than what they had behind him. The idea with sending Brendan Sullivan into this program is that, hey, even if Cade's 100%, it shouldn't be a foregone conclusion. Certainly, if he's less than 100%, I don't see them going with him, assuming Sullivan doesn't just completely tank based on what we know about him. So, and the other part about this is if Cade gets hurt in week 2 of fall camp and misses 2 to 3 weeks, I can't imagine, even if he's 100% by week 1, if Sullivan's been taking all the snaps with the reps and has looked good, or at least moderate, my guess is they go with Sullivan. And he could get hurt too. Like, there's no guarantees here, but we know the history with Cade McNamara. We know the injury history with Cade.
In Big Ten play, if he put up these kind of numbers as an Iowa quarterback with their defense and special teams, I'm pretty impressed that the first time he ever stepped on the field in college against Wisconsin, he went 11 of 17 through a touchdown pass, no picks. Then the next week he comes back against a good Maryland team, 18 of 24, did throw a couple picks in that game. 23 of 30 against Iowa, played Ohio State in a windstorm. That was the week that you were at Purdue, and there was wind all over the Midwest, and went 10 for 14 against the Buckeyes, and then 9 of 11 against Minnesota. And then we see just about 4 meaningful games in which he had a number of throws. And really the Nebraska game was his worst game statistically of his career. I can't rank it having watched it, although I did actually watch some of that game. I can't recollect what he looked like, but 12 of 23 with a pick. But then he finishes last season 16 of 23 against a pretty good Maryland team, 265, 2 touchdowns. And then against Iowa, 12 of 19 with a touchdown pass.
81 yards.
Yeah.
81 yards that's against Iowa, though. That's against Iowa. And
yes, they're tackling.
Here's what I look at in those numbers. I look at going through those 2 years that you have up. Go back to 2022, second career game. It was that his first start, because did he come in relief work against Wisconsin the week prior? So I'm assuming maybe Maryland was his first career start. He runs for 53 yards.
Yeah.
And then you scroll down to the game at Ohio State. He runs for 55 yards.
Yeah.
And then you scroll down to, game against Maryland in 23, runs for 56 yards. Those, again, when's the last time Iowa's had a quarterback that's even been in the positives? I would guess that, that would be a great stat to go find. When's the last time Iowa's had a quarterback with positive rushing yards? Maybe it's not as extreme as I would think it was, but
well, if a particular quarterback on any given day didn't get sacked and then he had a 3-yard run, but how about a 50-yard game?
That's not, yeah. But I'm just saying, like, how often do Iowa quarterbacks not get sacked regularly? And I'm just saying, and in general, with Spencer Petras, Deacon Hill, and even the hobbled Cade McNamara, the only positive rush yards they were getting were off QB sneaks. I'm just saying, that's a reality. I think you're going to actually, it wouldn't be hard to do that. Do you want me to do that real quick, Mark? Let's look up Deacon. I'll do this real quick. Deacon Hill. Anybody want to guess his stats as far as rushing stats just last year? Maybe it's not as extreme as I thought. By the way, have you heard anything about Deacon Hill's recruitment?
No.
So he's still out there. He's still on the table for somebody. So Deacon Hill, as far as rushing yards, let's see, 2020. Give me game log here. All right, 23 game log for Deacon Hill. Rushing yards, 0. Well, 0-0. The first two he didn't really play much. Didn't play against Penn State very much. Okay, let's jump to Purdue when he. Well, we'll go to Michigan State because he threw 27 passes against Michigan State. -3 rushing yards against Michigan State. -25 against Purdue. -18 against Wisconsin. -22 against Minnesota. -7 against Northwestern. -4 against Rutgers. -14 against Illinois. 10 against Nebraska. -16 against Michigan. -20 against Tennessee. I rest my case. Iowa had one game last year where they had positive rushing yards from the quarterback, and that was against Nebraska.
Do you want to hear Spencer Petras from 2022?
No. Well,
South Dakota State, -25. Iowa State, 1. Nevada, -16. Rutgers, -13. Michigan, -31. Illinois, -10. Ohio State, -7. Northwestern, 1 yard. Purdue, -19. Wisconsin, -41. Minnesota, -14. Nebraska, -8 for a -294 for the season.
So give me what's his average per game rushing numbers?
294 divided by 13. About
294 divided by 13, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to at least 294 divided by 13. So let's throw out, I'm going to look at Deacon. So basically,
it's actually
negative,
12.
What's
games. I'm sorry, it's actually 12 games. I just assumed he played 13. But Petras, that's right, he got hurt. He didn't play the bowl game.
294 divided by 12 is basically round up to 25. So -25 yards per game on the ground. Deacon Hill, shall we look at what Deacon Hill, his average was? -126 divided by, what would that be? 12 games. He played in 12 games last year. -11. So with Petras and Deacon Hill, split the difference, you're looking at what, like 18? Am I right? Somewhere in there. Over the last couple of seasons, on average, Iowa's starting quarterbacks have averaged -18 rush yards per game. The reason I bring that up is, let me pull Brendan Sullivan's average up.
And if we added 2021, it would be about the same.
2021. Or for
Petras is just about the same.
Yeah. Okay. So in general, let's go up to 20. Let's go over the last 3 years, average. We'll say on average, Iowa quarterbacks have averaged -20 rush yards per game. Now, Sullivan, if we just look at, well, I guess we could look at the last 2 years because we have both of them. 2023, he had 160 rush yards he really didn't play. Well, he really didn't play the first 4 games.
So he had about 8 games. So about 20 yards a game.
No, he only had 4 games played where he had 3 games in 2023 where he threw 4 attempts, 6 attempts, and 6 attempts, respectively. I'm not going to include those. If you look at the games where he played full number of snaps, basically it's 150. We'll throw out Duke and Penn State. So you're looking at about 100 yards in 4 games. That's 25 yards per game. And then you go to 2022, and let's see his games where he played the majority of the game. He had 5 games where he played a lot, I should say, at least double-digit pass attempts, and he had 97 yards in 5 games. So that's about 20. So you're right there. My point in bringing this up is you go from -20 on average with Iowa, and that doesn't mean it's going to be apples to apples from Northwestern to Iowa. I would expect Iowa's offensive line to maybe be a little bit better with as experienced as it is, who the head coach is, etc. Knock on wood, we'll see. You go -20, -220. That's a 40-yard difference. That is very much noteworthy. And I mean, as far as rushing numbers, Mark, where would that have put Iowa last year? They in the league, Iowa averaged, let's see, rushing yards per game. Iowa averaged 116 rush yards per game, which put them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ninth in the Big Ten. It's actually better than you would expect. Ninth in the Big Ten in rushing. But if you add those 40 yards, they're right there with Purdue at, well, no, I'm sorry. They're actually up there. They're hovering around the top 5 in the league in rush yards per game. Let me make sure I have this right. Yeah, they're right there in the top. But just with the 40-yard difference on the ground from quarterback play, potentially from Brendan Sullivan, you go from 116 to 156, which last year would have been right there with Minnesota, number 6 in the conference.
And of course, the position is attached to throwing the football. That's what we all think about. But it's about gaining yardage and moving the sticks so you can score. And if you can get that extra 40 yards on the ground, then you get that extra 40 yards on the ground. And it's something that the defense has to account for.
Absolutely. And here's the deal. We keep talking about it. Marco Lainez, struggle or not with the arm, his athleticism, his upside with his legs is far better than Sullivan or McNamara. Not saying he's going to be able to come in there and play a full allotment of snaps this year as a redshirt freshman who has reportedly struggled in practice. However, there's another guy that if you can figure out some ways to get him on the field in, with possible run plays up your sleeve, you have another running back that has the ability to throw, and it gives you more versatility and more flexibility. We hope, as Iowa fans, that that's the freedom that Kirk Ferentz is granting to Tim Lester.